yeah, there's no like fixed expectation of, future revenue compensation. So yeah, just really seeing, fee switches evolve, seeing delegate compensation models evolve, continuing to see more decentralization across, very successful protocols that haven't reached that stage yet, I think is like also something, we're really, really looking forward to.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Protocol Services Podcast. I'm your host, Jack Purdy, and with me today I have Callen from Wintermute. How's it going, Callen?
Yeah, really great. Thanks for having me, and it's great to be here.
Yeah, excited to dive into this one. So I figured to kick things off, so your title is DeFi Envoy. So can you tell us a little bit about what that means?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's a pretty, I guess, like interesting and broad title, but I guess to make things simple, essentially, like I help Wintermute's governance arm, and most of our interactions with DAOs on the DeFi side, a lot of the kind of public setting that we do is, I guess, passes my role. And I guess that's the general gist of why it's DeFi Envoy as
Awesome. So I guess, I don't know if you were part of like the initial decisioning process when Wintermute was sort of deciding to get into governance. If so, would love to hear about that. Or I guess alternatively, like how do you kind of see the governance arm fitting into Wintermute's business as a whole? And maybe even stepping back, just quick TLDR on Wintermute for maybe some listeners that aren't familiar.
Yeah, of course. So I guess for a bit of background on Wintermute was founded in 2017. It's a crypto-native algorithmic trading firm. We specialize in liquidity provision, OTC, and also have a ventures. We trade, across various EVM and non-EVM chains and all your favorite centralized and decentralized exchanges. The funny story on the governance is like the origins of Wintermute governance actually started with our CEO, Evgeny, who did a lot of the forum posts, spent a lot of time in these forums because as a liquidity provider back in the day, you had to interact with these DAOs and their public treasuries if you wanted to secure liquidity provision deals. So yeah, I think that's a bit of a fun backstory there. And I guess we kind of decided to go full board and establish our delegate platforms, largely comes from our crypto native stance and like truly wanting to empower decentralization. And, one of the key pillars of this is governance. And we see this continuing to evolve, for the next few years and so on. And we think governance is going to play like a large role in truly decentralizing, blockchains, DeFi protocols, all that sort of jazz. So having governance arm for us, I also think like really helps differentiate us from our competitors. We have our trading arm, our ventures arm, and now our governance arm. For our competitors, a lot of them don't really have a governance arm. So on the investment side, it's really like a service and product we can kind of offer, our portfolio companies, which really helps us set us apart. One of the clearest examples of this is probably, our public involvement in DYDX. We've done over 12 plus on-chain, off-chain proposals. We've created multiple on-chain payloads. We've improved liquidity provider rewards there, helps them transition to V4. So having this governance really allows us to take like an activist approach as an investor and actually like use our tokens to, improve governance efficiency, but also help our portfolio companies kind of transition from maybe a less decentralized structure to something that is more decentralized over time.
Interesting. So it kind of helps, the aggregate business where being involved in governance like actually, enables you to get the capital to make markets with these tokens. But then, right, obviously, if you're investing, like you have an interest in the long-term success. So wanting to contribute towards that, right? Because operating decentralized orgs is very complex. And I think, DAOs appreciate help from, well-intentioned, intelligent kind of builders that are in the weeds. So it's very interesting to see.
Yeah, 100%. And just to make it clear, the liquidity provision side, these tokens are not used for governance. It strictly comes from investments or other delegates.
Are all of the delegate platforms you have in companies you've invested in, or are there some other kind of strategic plays there?
No, not all of them, to be honest. Like when we started our delegate platforms, like there are two sides to it. There's definitely the strategic side, like what I mentioned, where we hold investments and it makes sense for us to participate. But there are also non-strategic sides where we genuinely just wanted to help, blue chip DeFi protocols that are like core pillars of DeFi and the future in terms of governance and really kind of just help out there. So, yeah, there's definitely some delegate platforms that we don't hold any investments in, but, we maintain very high participation rates. We're constantly providing feedback in forums and providing voting rationale.
And how big is like the governance team? Like, is it, yourself? Do you have supporting resources? Would love to hear a little bit more, I guess, about like the day-to-day of this for you guys.
Yeah, of course. So it's honestly just myself that runs our 7 delegate platforms across DYDX, Optimism, Arbitrum, Lido, Aave, Compound, and Uniswap. We also have some ad hoc DAOs, I guess, or like ad hoc governance work where we help out our portfolio companies, but we don't necessarily commit to like a full-time public delegate platform. But in saying that, like, even though I guess I maintain most of these delegate platforms, like, I get to rely on the resources of everyone else at Wintermute, which is really great. Like when there is like highly technical proposals like Arbitrum's time boost, it's getting the DeFi team involved on that, understanding it from their perspective and kind of pushing their feedback back to the forums, or whether it be the BD team or, the CeFi traders or our head of research. So yeah, well, I guess I kind of manage the day-to-day. There's a lot of support that I can rely on, which is awesome.
And where do you see, I guess, like Wintermute and yourselves, like secret sauce, right? Like obviously there's so many proposals, conversations going on, like you can't possibly contribute to all of them. So where do you see like your biggest value add or different, types of topics you tend to sort of double down on?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think like ultimately it depends on the strengths of the company that you work at or the type of individual you are and the things that you have studied, right? For us, like my philosophy is like we aim to maintain like 100% participation rate on chain and off chain and have voting rationale posted for all of these votes. But I would say when it comes to like actually posting in the forums, like we don't necessarily see the need to like literally just post and be like, oh, this is a great proposal, like we support it. It's like when we post in forums, it's either because it's highly controversial and we kind of want to give our opinion about something, or it's a post where we can provide a unique perspective and actually like add value to the discussion and the proposal at hand. And largely this will come from like if we notice anything that revolves around trading, EVM, incentives, mechanism design, and a little bit of risk. That's kind of where we come in and can provide some like good opinions. And that's kind of, how we handle our feedback.
And is there ever like internal conflict where, maybe there is like, some massive proposal for the Arbitrum DAO, and like you have a strong stance, but, maybe there's like competing interests at Wintermute or maybe like potential conflicts of interest, like anything that comes up that you can kind of speak to, general framework for dealing with some of that?
Yeah, I wouldn't say there's like, it's not really internal conflicts, but like as you can imagine, we're a pretty big company now and we have a lot of like counterparties and partners throughout like the whole of the ecosystem. So I think like the hardest part is really like juggling expectations and around these and handling these relationships when it comes to votes, because some of these partners are ultimately competing with each other, right? So it's like, how do you vote for like one person and then not vote for the other person, which is like honestly the hardest part of it. But I think something that really helps with that is like having a very clear and objective decision framework when we vote. We have clear voting principles that we have in all of our delegate platforms. This really helps kind of providing rationale to, counterparties and partners when these votes come up. And we also spend a lot of time with these partners, in the early stages to provide a lot of feedback to a point where we'd be happy to support them. And when it comes to like, I guess maybe internal conflict of like where Wintermute is being elected for something and we hold a lot of voting power, we will in most cases always abstain to vote, or we will provide equal votes to all candidates. Like we just don't feel it's right to kind of utilize, the voting power that has been trusted with us to vote for ourselves. It's just not a great practice. And when it comes to maybe voting for, portfolio companies, we will often like come to the forums very early on and make it very clear to the public that we have invested in this company. And, if we plan to vote for this company, here is exactly why we're going to do it and why we think it's a good choice. And by coming early to the forums, like you allow enough time for the public and community members to kind of have discussions with you and really gauge if, they're really not happy with you voting. And if that is the case, then we will choose to abstain from voting.
Yeah, makes sense. And right, when it comes to like conflicts of interest like that, there's nothing wrong with that. Any, company, obviously you have partners you work with, you have different protocols with a vested interest in. But yeah, I think, provided like there's transparency, there's nothing wrong with, making a cohesive argument for why you think, a proposal is good or bad, as long as you kind of make that known. But so you mentioned a clear voting framework. Can you speak a little bit more to that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's three core pillars, really. Like the first pillar is like kind of how we view overall votes and make our decisions. And we essentially prioritize like long-term value add sustainable proposals over, short-term kind of opportunism, which essentially means like examples of this is like, we're not going to support like ridiculous liquidity mining incentives that have like no positive second order effects, or, the benefits of these things are going to be, very short term and provide no real value to the protocol DAO, the industry. So that's like kind of the main general pillar of how we take a long-term approach to voting. And then the other two is kind of more on the operational side. Like we always try to be very proactive and transparent in the community, and this is displayed in our voting rationale and in our forums discussions. And the third one is like really taking like an objective and data-driven approach to the way we vote. That's something that I kind of pride ourselves on, is like, it also makes the hard discussions like a lot easier, right? Because if you can create an argument with objective data and create your point of view, it's a lot easier to have these conversations and it's less subjective. And that's kind of the three main voting principles that we follow to make our decisions.
And so maybe it might be helpful to almost make this more concrete. So something, right, that's been top of mind for Messari is, we've been a little bit more involved in Arbitrum, just starting to speak to stakeholders, trying to get a feel for how we can provide value. And they have, this RFP process for the ARDC, which for listeners, the Arbitrum Research and Development Collective, which is sort of a call for research providers to have a 6-month contract basis to satisfy the research analytics needs for the DAO. So for a situation like this, I would love to hear how you kind of run through this decisioning process to gauge potential service providers.
Yeah, of course. I mean, like there's like quite a few, I guess for the ARDC specifically, there's quite a few factors that we typically consider, and this is kind of what we considered in V1 of the ARDC. But I would say a few things that we really consider is, I guess, like prior Arbitrum engagement. I think, while it's not a deal breaker for us, I genuinely like to see, I guess, companies have like prior involvement within the Arbitrum ecosystem. Doesn't necessarily need to be the DAO, but I guess kind of just shows a bit of like sweat equity in a sense of like, you're there, you've been supporting kind of from different channels, and you have a very good understanding of like kind of what's going on at the moment. Second one is, I guess, prior research work that is accessible, easy to read, so you can judge the quality of work and the quality of, the submission. That's something that's also very important for us. And then third one I would say is like overall context and technical knowledge. For Arbitrum, it's an L2, they have orbit chains, they now have stylus. I feel like to select a very appropriate, research provider, they have to have a very good background and understanding of kind of all these facets within, the Arbitrum ecosystem that we think would be like extremely valuable, and that they can easily, I guess, provide deliverables against when the DAO calls upon it. And so those are the ARDC, especially on the research side. That's kind of the main things we are considering here. I guess, there is cost, but I would say like cost isn't the biggest factor for us, because if you have a very high quality candidate that, requests a bit more money than someone else, I don't think that should be like a very big differentiator, to be honest. I guess that only really matters when you have someone that's requesting like a ridiculous amount of money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that approach because, having gone through many a governance process, I found often when, you're a service provider, and if, you're worth your weight, like these things cost money. If you provide a valuable service, the resources that go into it, right? Having analysts, engineers, like their time is valuable. And I think a lot of times, when someone comes asking for, $20, $50, $100,000, like people on forums be like, oh, that's so much money. Like they get like sticker shock. But it's like also when you realize, okay, these are billion-dollar organizations. If you have a service provider that's like meaningfully moving the needle, and like if they're like a risk provider and they're doing their job, they're potentially saving like millions of dollars for the DAO. So, there's definitely an ROI component to it. So that's cool to see how you're thinking about it. Yeah, I guess within Arbitrum, because that's one of the more active DAOs, I know they have, a lot going on in like the treasury management side. And I think that's going to be a much bigger part of the conversation as more of these DAOs start to think of how can we put these productive assets to use. I would be curious kind of how you're thinking about it with maybe them as like a case study for, how they can start, thinking through getting service providers, having people start to, meaningfully manage a pretty sizable treasury.
Yeah, I think like honestly, I'm someone who's always been very pro treasury management and diversification. I think Arbitrum inherently is like pretty lucky in the sense that they receive revenue from like sequencer fees, right? So they kind of have like this natural diversification into ETH, which is like really nice. I would have liked to seen their ETH balance be used more as opposed to ARB tokens, but I think we'll eventually get there. I think treasury management is like honestly kind of hard when you have such a large DAO like Arbitrum, because you have so many people with differing opinions, and the risk spectrum is like quite wide of like what people think is like too risky or less risky. Then you also have the conversation of like, okay, if you want to take a simple approach and simply just take the ETH and stake it with a liquid staking solution, it's like, okay, some people don't want to support certain liquid staking solutions just because of like certain factors, or some people don't want to support other liquid staking solutions because they don't think it's like secure or safe enough, or maybe their market share is too large and they want like further diversification. So it's very, very tricky to kind of handle like all the DAO's expectations. But I think like taking a very like simple approach to it and kind of just starting with maybe some small capital and slowly building that up over time is like probably the best way in Arbitrum's case. As you mentioned, we have Treasury Management V1.2, which is currently, I believe, on Tally. And, luckily enough, I have been selected as one of the council members on, the growth committee, which has been like great and really nice. And so I think that is honestly like a challenge we will be facing, is like managing all these expectations. But I think just starting somewhere, taking a very simple approach. And for Arbitrum, it's very easy to, I guess, improve from the current state, like just simply earning some additional yield on ETH is already like a big step into securing, I guess, some additional revenue for the DAO. But I think like one thing that's certainly missing is, maybe some more stable coins and earning yield on these stable coins. I would say in general, on the other side, like I am also very pro, treasury managers like the Key stake houses. I think they provide like a great service to these DAOs. It kind of takes a lot of the burden off these DAOs, and they just know that they can trust, these highly professional organizations to adapt to, a risk profile that the DAO is comfortable with, and to handle all the operations on the back end in a very decentralized manner, which is amazing. So yeah, very, very pro treasury management, very pro diversification, and very pro earning and generating yield for treasuries, so that the native tokens don't have to be consistently sold off over time.
And I guess so you're right, being so in the weeds, with many, it seems like you're almost like an extension of them, right? Like when you join these committees, you almost become like a part-time employee. And I know, in some instances there's compensation for it, and others it's like, almost like goodwill. And obviously a lot of times like there's ROI from the long-term success of the protocol, especially if they're a portfolio company. But I'm kind of curious, how do you guys view the ROI of like a lot of these efforts? Is this something you guys like handle on a case-by-case basis and then assess, okay, maybe you want to do more of this, less of that? Or I guess as an addendum, like when you think about your governance efforts going forward, is this something you guys plan to scale out more and like see it being a potential revenue generating stream?
Yeah, I think like ROI on governance for us, I think it's a bit hard to quantify, to be honest. Like personally for me, right, I think it's really about like these small wins, these showing up every day, making sure you have extremely high participation, trying to actually provide value to the DAO. And I think like a byproduct of that is the delegation power that you accumulate over time, and also the recognition and trust of like the Wintermute brand. I think that's like the main ROI for us. Like for us personally, like Wintermute as an organization, we do not take compensation for any of our delegate work. It's just something that we don't think is necessary, and that's not to say that we think it's wrong. It's just like we are luckily in a position where we kind of don't need to rely on that sort of stuff, and we'd prefer to kind of just do it out of our own pocket and provide value and time to these DAOs and portfolio companies simply because we just want to help and add value. So it's not really like a revenue generating kind of arm for us. It's mostly about like truly providing value, improving our brand, improving the recognition of our brand, and just trying to be a good actor in the space.
So fun question for you. If you were Messari, would you set up a delegate platform?
I think like honestly, like go for it. I think it is a bit tricky though, right? Because as you can imagine, like DAOs, there's a lot of politics, right? And I feel like it's very easy to kind of make enemies depending on the way you view and go about certain things. And I think as a service provider, like when you get paid, like you're paid to fulfill just a very clear and objective function within the DAO, right? And I think that's like really great, and that's the whole purpose of it. And then I think like maybe for some service providers, they get a bit concerned that if they start dabbling in DAO politics and voting certain ways, that it might hurt their chances in the future to be re-elected. But on the other hand, it's like if you do have a delegate platform, right, and you do everything right and you make no enemies, I think it definitely puts you in good steads to continue your relationship with the DAO. It shows you have skin in the game. It shows you care about the future of a protocol or a DAO. And so I think it can work in both ways. But yeah, I think it is like a little bit risky. And sometimes there can be like clear conflicts of interest that you have to be like, I guess, aware of that might affect your chances of being, renewed as a service provider.
Yeah, no, good insights there.
You guys should jump into the forums and become delegates. I would love to see them.
Yeah, if I had my way, this would have been done years ago. But obviously, being US based company, particularly with historical stances towards DAOs, like with the Uki DAO ruling, like we kind of got scared off. But maybe with this new administration, things might change. Because yeah, I think it can be very high ROI, like particularly for service providers in the research realm, almost because becoming a delegate like it's like a forcing function to just continue to be super deep in the weeds and like understand what's going on at like an operational level, which ultimately I think informs the quality of research.
Yeah, 100%. And there are some, research firms that do this well already. And I think, maybe the biggest bonus as a research firm is like being able to really provide like deep insights that are quite objective and, data driven. And so that way it's kind of hard to go down certain paths that might, affect your chances of being renewed, in a bad way. So I think like as a research firm, you definitely have an advantage here of like actually providing a lot of value to DAOs from a delegate standpoint.
And maybe switching gears here. So from the stance of like your guys' delegate platform, is actually like growing voting share kind of like a KPI of yours, or is it something you guys think about, or is it more just like, hey, we have this name, our value speaks for itself, and people will provide votes based on that merit?
I would say it's like always a KPI and something, we try to improve over time. I would say like gaining delegation is pretty hard. We've had decent success with it. We are lucky to have our benches, which certainly helps in certain DAOs. But I would say we still have many small and large delegates that we've never met, never spoken to, don't know who is, which is like really, really fantastic. And I'm very grateful for that. And, we thank all these delegators that kind of choose us as their platform, which is like amazing. However, I wouldn't say like we are actively, constantly going around and asking for delegation power. Like for us, our pitch is like all very public. It's our delegate platforms. It's the way we vote. It's the way we hold ourselves in public. It's the work that we provide to DAOs. And that's kind of what we take and, present to people that potentially want to delegate to us. And yeah, that's our main pitch, I would say.
And having been in the trenches for a couple of years now, in several different DAOs, and they're all super active. Like, what are some general trends you've been seeing, I guess, across kind of how these DAOs are operating?
Yeah, of course. I think thinking about it, 2-3 years ago, like things have changed quite a lot. I feel like back in the day, like you kind of just held these tokens, right? And you voted on proposals that the foundations or labs team put up, right? Or core team members, right? And these foundations and labs were the people, driving product development, updates, creating proposals in the forums, taking them to snapshot and on-chain proposals, handing treasuries, all that sort of stuff. But now, like, we're at a time where I feel like DAOs are actually like truly a lot more decentralized from that point of view. As you know, like with all these service providers that have like come along, I guess the clearest ones would be like the risk providers that started at Aave, like a lot of these companies have now raised like millions and millions of dollars, have expanded their scope to many other DAOs, have provided a lot more value and a lot more products to the industry, which I think is like absolutely amazing. So I feel like you're kind of getting to a point where DAOs are acting as springboards for, companies that kind of start out a bit small and serve like a key purpose to governance and DAOs in general, and then can expand from there after a bit of funding, grow their team, which is like really, really amazing to see. So I definitely think, DAOs have grown since, 2-3 years ago. They've become more decentralized in terms of operations. And we've also seen experimentations with DAO structures. You're seeing a lot more councils, you're seeing a lot more working groups, which I think is awesome. I think like looking into the future, now that there's probably a better US regime, we will start to see the next phase of DAOs where we get a lot more fee switches, which will be extremely interesting to kind of observe because, like a lot of these fee switches will tie, I guess, delegate compensation, token holder compensation with the growth of a platform. And so it's going to be very, very interesting to see like how much of effect this has on voting participation, delegates, and what they can truly do to help grow these platforms, which is something like we're really, really looking forward to, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's a positive sign just for the maturation of this space and for DAOs that, over the last couple of years, like you can actually build a viable business model as a service provider, working with a key number of DAOs. If you have your niche where you can be like, hey, I'm the best risk provider, treasury manager, whatever, and just focus on that, build a team, and then, have multiple revenue streams through that. And like that helps DAOs along this spectrum of decentralization now that they don't have to rely on that core team as much.
Yeah, 100%. And I only see this getting bigger as, DeFi grows and DAO treasuries grow as well. Very bullish DAOs.
Are there any like missing or underserviced areas of DAOs where like, right now, okay, there's a number of risk providers that seems to be like, space that's more matured, but yeah, like other things that DAOs need that, there's not a ton of providers able to step in and help?
It heavily depends on the specific DAO and the actual like core function of a protocol, right? Because some DAOs are like heavily governance minimized and there's only so much you can do, for example, Uniswap, right? And then some DAOs, there's a lot of things that governance can actually touch, and therefore there's a lot more fields in which service providers could be needed. I think like honestly, the main gap is just like finding ways in which decentralization can improve and service providers can get paid, and legal structures for DAOs. I think that's like one of the biggest blockers at the moment is like having a fully functional legal structure that protects DAOs and token holders so that they can also hire service providers, in a fully legal manner, as well as be protected to some extent from, I guess, litigation. So I think like for me, it's more on like the tooling side when it comes to decentralization. I think like one key area that also is really lacking and definitely needs a bit more research and experimentation is like, delegate compensation, to be honest. That I feel like I'm still undecided how good or bad it is. I think overall it's probably a positive, and I've seen firsthand the effect it's had on, participation, forum discussion. But the hardest question is like actually determining how much a delegate should get paid. I think that's like,
yeah, because you can almost think about delegates as service providers in their own right, where like they're stewards of governance, and like that takes work, and so there are costs associated. But yeah, it gets tricky when it comes to how much. Like, do they name their own price? Like, do you have a fixed amount for all? But like, not everyone provides equal value. But it's one of the problems where, given enough time, like we'll experiment and figure out what works, what doesn't work, and that's kind of like the beauty of doing this all in public is that, DAOs can kind of see what others are doing and then iterate on that and kind of construct models that make sense for them.
Yeah, one thing, I guess like one mechanism that I'm very kind of bullish on and would love to see it experimented with is kind of like a delegate proof of stake network in a sense, like similar to your Cosmos chains, right? Where you have like these validators that receive delegations, they take a commission and they vote on proposals, they update chains, they look after the chain, all that sort of stuff, right? And I would love to see that transition to kind of more of like a governance-esque model where, say, you have Uniswap, they turn on a fee switch. For you to earn fees as a token holder, you have to delegate your tokens, right? And then say now these delegates get a 5 to 10% commission rate that is fixed across the board or can be slightly, I guess, changeable. And then you now have this model where one, compensation is kind of sustainable because it comes from the actual protocol through, trading fees and revenue. These delegates are now very more inclined to go seek out delegation because the more delegation they get, the higher their commission base will be. So it's more revenue for them and more income for them. That also brings more delegated voting power to the DAO, right? So you have way better governance participation. You have far less governance apathy. And these delegates, even though they may not necessarily now hold like uni tokens, they are directly aligned with the growth of, say, Uniswap, right? Because like if they can really dig deep and help grow Uniswap, increase trading volume, increase swap fees, this directly translates to more income or revenue for themselves. So those sort of models where it's like it's more, I guess, variable and really, really depends on the success of a protocol is something like I really want to see more explored versus like these flat fee structures where it's like, hey, if you manage 80% participation rate, like we'll pay you 6K a month. I think like those sort of models, it's extremely, extremely hard to kind of understand if you're overpaying or underpaying for the certain services that you receive.
Are there any DAOs talking about a model like that now?
I'm not too sure now. I think, the Tally team are working on or have worked on like these Unistaker contracts where they kind of have like an LST. And I believe there is a function in there which can direct revenue to delegates. So it's very, very similar to what I just spoke about. So if that, takes off, I think that's something to definitely keep an eye on and something we're, really closely looking at. We spoke to the Tally team about this. I think we had a very similar vision on this topic. So yeah, very excited to see them launch that. And would love to see more DAOs experiment with these types of structures because look, maybe it doesn't work, maybe it does, but at the end of the day, you provide like valuable information to the rest of the industry, which I think is great.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. So you mentioned Tally. So maybe going on more like the governance tooling side, that's something there's been, right, tremendous advancements in the last couple of years. But maybe if you had like, a magic wand to build like the perfect product for yourself as a delegate to just like help you manage, all these different DAOs and different conversations, proposals you're shepherding, like what's kind of missing now, or what would that ideal state look like in terms of tools available to you?
Yeah, I think perfect world would be like you have all your on-chain, off-chain voting in the same UI, right? You have like a feed of proposals that are kind of live in the forums that are new, have a lot of discussion, all in the same UI. And then I think like ultimately the last thing I would want is to have like a sidebar to some extent, or like a section within the screen to show me if there's votes that I have not voted on yet and are close to kind of expiring, to make sure that you really stay up to date with your participation. Right now, like the kind of workflow that we're using is like, yeah, you have your snapshot, you have your tally, which are both great because they kind of aggregate all DAOs into kind of like, two interfaces, which is like firstly really great. And, that is a lot more beneficial than having to have like all these separate links for DAOs. So we have tally, we have snapshot, and then to kind of stay on top of, I guess, proposals that are live and that we have not voted on for, we created like a June dashboard called Wintergov, where you can run a query, you can enter your address, you can want to run a query, and it goes and finds all these proposals that are live that you haven't voted for and how much time you have left to vote, which is something that I use, every 2 days. You just run the query to make sure you're up to date. So yeah, having all that in one UI would be like magnificent. There's also a Telegram bot that we use, Tribuni, which I think is like made by a small team. It's really great. They also kind of spam you with notifications when, there's proposals or DAOs that you follow that have, votes that you haven't voted for. So yeah, like everything under one clean UI, which is very to the point, very simple, I think is like something we would really like to see.
Yeah, and shameless plug, of course, Messari can also get alerts straight from the forum. So even at the earliest stage, you can kind of select your DAOs and say, hey, we care about, this type, alert me once they come out, and can track them that way. I know we've sort of thought about that a little bit.
Yes,
and something like I use it to keep up with mine because it's quite the hurdle.
Governor is great. We have used it in the past for an extensive amount of time.
Yeah, I guess, wrapping up here, thinking more towards like the future of DAOs and governance, like anything like you're particularly excited to see. So, we mentioned more experimentation with delegate compensation, treasury management, like any other big advancements you see on the horizon, or that you kind of would be looking forward to see?
I think it's honestly what I already mentioned, the fee switches, the new methods to pay delegates, all that sort of stuff is something I'm personally really excited for. And I think it'll be the next big step for DAOs because, it allows more people to come in and contribute and have a long-term understanding that they can commit to a place and know that they can be rewarded in the long run, and they can commit a lot more resources than say if it's just a single delegation program where it might be one-off or it's a trial or it might only last 6 months and they've committed all this time and resources to a DAO. Yeah, there's no fixed expectation of future revenue compensation. So yeah, just really seeing fee switches evolve, seeing delegate compensation models evolve, continuing to see more decentralization across very successful protocols that haven't reached that stage yet, I think is also something we're really looking forward to.
And maybe for Wintermute in particular, say over the next couple of years, crypto becomes $10 trillion plus asset class. You guys keep crushing on the trading side. How do you see sort of your governance participation evolving over that time?
Yeah, of course. I mean, best case, we have a lot more people on the Wintermute governance side providing, the same value or even better value that we provide now. But for me, it's just more delegate platforms, more voting power, greater value add to these DAOs, greater participation in councils, grants programs, treasury management, just really kind of providing as much value and expertise from our side as we can is really, my main focus for the next 1 to 2 to 5 years, to be honest.
I love it. Yeah. Bullish all things, top delegates, the DAO space in general. But yeah, thank you again so much for coming on. Historically, we've talked to a bunch of the service providers, and really interesting to hear the perspective of a delegate and kind of how you assess the landscape. So
thank you so much for having me. It was great.
Of course. Cheers.